Residents of a town suddenly fall dead, while the dead from cemeteries around them rise. Be ready for a story that you will never forget. It all started on a Sunday morning, just like any other. The birds were singing, the sun was shining, and people were going about their daily routines. But then, something strange happened. Residents of a small town suddenly fell dead, as if struck down by some mysterious force. At first, it was just a few people here and there. But as the day went on, the number of casualties grew. By nightfall, the entire town was in chaos. The dead were piled up in the streets, their eyes wide open and their bodies cold to the touch. The next day, the same thing happened in the neighboring towns and cities. People were dropping like flies, their bodies twitching and foaming at the mouth. It was as if a plague had been unleashed upon the world. But there was something even more sinister at work. The dead from the cemeteries around the affected areas were rising from their graves, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They were hungry, and they were coming for the living. I was one of the few who survived the initial outbreak. I had been out running errands when it happened, and I had managed to make it back to my apartment before the dead had started to roam the streets. But I knew that I couldn't stay there forever. I had to find a way to escape, to find a safe house. I spent the next few days barricading myself inside my apartment, listening to the sounds of the undead outside. They would bang on the walls and windows, trying to get in, but I was too smart for them. I had stocked up on food and water, and I had a gun for protection. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to run out of supplies. I could feel myself getting weaker, hungrier and thirstier by the day. I knew that I couldn't survive much longer on my own. That's when I had an idea. I would go out into the city, searching for other survivors. Maybe I could find a group of people who had managed to survive the initial outbreak, and who could help me escape the zombie hordes. I packed a bag with some supplies, and set out into the ruins of the city. It was a dangerous journey, filled with obstacles and dangers at every turn, but I was determined to keep going, no matter what. As I made my way through the streets, I could see the evidence of the apocalypse all around me. Buildings were crumbling, cars were overturned, and the smell of death hung in the air. But I didn't let that stop me. I pushed on, determined to find someone, anyone, who was still alive. And then, I saw them, a group of people, huddled together in a dark alleyway. They looked like they were in their late 20s and early 30s, and they were armed with whatever weapons they could find. I approached them cautiously, holding up my hands to show that I meant no harm. They looked at me suspiciously at first, but when I told them my story, they listened. They had been holed up in the alleyway for weeks, surviving on whatever they could find. We made a plan to leave the city together, using the cars that were still running to make our escape. It was a risky move, but it was our only hope. As we drove out of the city, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. We had made it out alive, and we had each other. But I knew that the danger was far from over. The dead were still out there, waiting for us, and we had to keep moving, always on the lookout for danger. We had to find a safe place to settle, a place where we could rebuild our lives and start again. But even as we drove away from the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that the end was still coming. The dead would rise again, and there would be no escape. I just had to hope that we would be ready when it happened. As we drove, we talked about our plans for the future. We decided to head west, away from the city and towards the mountains. We hoped that the higher altitude would be safer from the zombie hordes. We stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town to fill up and take a break. As we were walking back to the car, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like something was moving in the bushes. I grabbed one of my companions and we ran towards the noise. As we got closer, we saw a group of zombies shambling towards us. We turned and ran back towards the car, but there were too many of them. D4 were surrounded. My companions fought bravely, but there were too many of them. I was knocked to the ground and bitten on the arm. ULT text. As I lay there, I saw one of my companions get taken down. I knew that I had to do something to save myself. I pulled out my gun and fired, killing several of the zombies, but it was no use. There were too many of them. I was outnumbered and outgunned. As I lay there, dying, I couldn't help but feel a sense of despair. I had survived the initial outbreak, only to be taken down by a group of zombies. It was a fitting end to my story, but as I slipped away, I saw something strange. It was like a bright light, shining down on me from above. I felt a sense of peace and tranquility wash over me, and I knew that I was going to be okay. And then, everything went back. I woke up later, in a strange place. It was like a dream, but it felt real. I looked down and saw that my arm was healing, and that I was no longer infected. I got up and saw that I was in a small cabin, surrounded by trees. There was a note on the table, addressed to me. It was from a group of survivors who had found me and brought me here. They had nursed me back to health and given me a chance to start over. I knew that I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I was going to make the most of this new life and do everything in my power to keep myself and the others safe. I knew that the end was still coming, but I was ready for it. I had lived through the apocalypse, and I had come out on the other side. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would always be a survivor.